My wife looked at me with a coldness I had never seen in 40 years of marriage, her perfectly manicured fingers tapping on my mahogany desk. She laughed, a dry, humorless sound that chilled my blood. "You will have to beg me for breakfast money, Harry. Forget about the credit cards. Forget about the bank accounts. From now on, if you want a single cent to buy a cup of coffee, you ask me first. And if I am in a good mood, maybe I will give it to you. My son, the boy. I raised the boy I sent to the best universities, just sat there nodding, looking at his mother with admiration. They thought they had won. They thought the old man was finished. They had no idea that they had just started a war they could never win. My name is Harry Coleman. I am 72 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, I thought I was the patriarch of a loving family. I built Coleman Construction from a single pickup truck and a box of rusty tools into a multi-million-dollar empire. I gave my wife Brenda a life of luxury. I gave my son Ryan a career he did not earn. I thought I was respected. I was wrong. If you are new here, take a deep breath, because what I am about to tell you is a nightmare that could happen to anyone who trusts the wrong people, even if they share your blood. If you have ever felt betrayed by family, hit that like button right now. It helps this story reach others who need to hear it. And please subscribe to the channel so you do not miss how I turned the tables on them. Also tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from right now? I love reading where you all are from. It started on a Tuesday that felt like any other. The sun was shining over Chicago. I put on my suit, the charcoal one Brenda always said made me look distinguished. I felt good. I felt strong. My morning ritual was simple. I would drive to the Roasted Bean, a coffee shop 3 blocks from our estate, get a black coffee and a plain bagel, and read the Wall Street Journal. It was my time. The baristas knew me. They knew my order before I even walked through the glass doors. "Good morning, Mr. Coleman," the young girl at the counter said. Her name was Sarah. She was always smiling. The usual today. "Yes, please, Sarah," I said, pulling out my wallet. I felt the familiar weight of the leather. I pulled out my American Express Platinum card. It was a symbol of my hard work. A card with no limit. A card that had paid for family vacations in Europe, for Ryan's tuition at Yale, for the diamond necklace Brenda wore to charity galas. I tapped it on the reader and waited for the beep. Instead, there was a harsh buzz. The little screen flashed red. Declined. I frowned. "That is strange," I said, giving a small laugh. "I must have demagnetized it. Try it again, please." Sarah looked a bit embarrassed. She tapped it again. Buzz. Declined. "Mr. Coleman." "It says the card is inactive," she whispered, trying not to let the people behind me hear. The line was getting long. I could feel eyes on my back. A man in a hurry sighed loudly. My face felt hot. Shame is a feeling I had not felt in decades. I was Harry Coleman. My bills were always paid early. "I apologize," I said, my voice tight. "Let me use the Visa." I pulled out the backup card, the one linked to the joint operational account. I inserted the chip this time. I watched the screen. Processing. Processing. Then that terrible red light again. Contact bank. Restricted card. My hands started to shake. Not from age, but from a sudden cold spike of adrenaline. This was impossible. There was over $200,000 in that checking account yesterday. I checked it myself. "Is everything okay, sir?" Sarah asked, her voice full of pity. I hated that look. I did not want pity. I wanted my coffee. I wanted my dignity. I dug into my pocket and found a $20 bill. Cash. Thank God for cash. "Keep the change," I muttered, grabbing the cup. I walked out of the shop without looking back, my ears burning. I felt like a criminal. I felt like a fraud. I sat in my car, a vintage Mercedes I had restored myself. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I called the bank. The automated voice was cheerful. "We are sorry, but the access code you entered is invalid. Please contact the primary account holder." Primary account holder. That was me. It had always been me. I drove home. I did not drive fast. I drove with a terrifying, calculated slowness. My mind was racing. Was it identity theft? Had hackers drained the accounts? But deep down in the pit of my stomach, I knew it was not a stranger. A stranger steals money and runs. A stranger does not change access codes. A stranger does not restrict cards. This was personal. I pulled into the driveway of the house I had built 20 years ago. It was a sprawling estate, beautiful and imposing. Usually seeing it gave me a sense of pride. Today it looked like a fortress that had locked me out. I walked through the front door. The house was quiet. Too quiet. "Brenda," I called out. My voice echoed in the high foyer. No answer. I walked toward my home office. The double oak doors were closed. I reached for the handle and pushed them open. The sight that met my eyes stopped me dead in my tracks. My son Ryan was sitting in my chair. He was not just sitting. He was leaning back, his feet up on my desk, wearing one of his expensive Italian suits that I paid for. He was spinning a pen between his fingers. My pen. Brenda was sitting on the leather sofa across from him, sipping a glass of iced tea. They looked like they were in the middle of a pleasant business meeting. They looked up as I entered, and neither of them looked surprised. They looked ready. "What is going on?" I asked, my voice low and dangerous. I went to buy a coffee and my cards were declined. Both of them. The bank says I am not the primary account holder. Ryan took his feet off the desk, but he did not stand up. He smiled a smile that did not reach his eyes. It was a smile of condescension. "Oh, that. Yes. We were going to tell you tonight at dinner, Dad. But I guess you found out early." "You were going to tell me," I repeated, stepping further into the room. "Tell me what?" "That you robbed me. That you hacked my accounts." Brenda set her iced tea down on the coaster. She smoothed her skirt and looked at me with a calm, almost bored expression. "Harry, do not be dramatic. Nobody robbed you. We are simply restructuring the family finances. We had a meeting with the family attorney this morning." I stared at her. "I did not have a meeting with any attorney." "Exactly," Ryan said. "We did it under the power of attorney clause you signed 5 years ago. Remember, when you had that heart scare? You signed a document giving us control if you were ever incapacitated or deemed unfit to manage complex assets." "I am not incapacitated," I roared. "I am standing right here. I ran a board meeting yesterday. I drove here. I am perfectly fine." Brenda sighed as if she was dealing with a tantrum-throwing toddler. "Harry, listen to yourself. You are shouting. You are red in the face. This is exactly what we are talking about. You are getting older. You are becoming erratic. We have noticed it for months. You forget things. You make impulsive decisions. I do not forget things," I snapped. Ryan stood up then. He walked around the desk and stood in front of me. He was taller than me now, but he had never looked me in the eye like a man. He always looked away. Today, he stared right at me. "Dad, look. We are doing this for your own good. The market is volatile. You have been too conservative with the investments. We want to protect the legacy. We transferred the liquid assets into a secure trust managed by Brenda and me. It is safer this way." "Safer," I spat the word out. "You embarrassed me in public. You cut off my access to my own money." "It is not your money anymore," Harry, Brenda said softly. "It is the family's money. And you have spent enough of it. All those donations to veteran charities. The restoration of that old car. It is bleeding us dry. We are just putting a tourniquet on the wound." I looked from my wife to my son. I saw the greed in their eyes. It was not about protection. It was not about my health. It was about control. They had been planning this. The power of attorney was meant for a coma, for a stroke, not for a Tuesday morning when I was perfectly healthy. So what happens now, I asked, forcing myself to be calm. How do I buy gas? How do I buy food? Brenda reached into her purse. She pulled out a card. It was a generic prepaid debit card, a green dot card you buy at a pharmacy. She tossed it onto the desk. It slid across the mahogany surface and stopped near my hand. There is $500 on that, she said. That is your allowance for the week. It should be enough for your coffee and your little lunches. If you need more, you can submit a request to Ryan, and we will review it. I looked at the cheap plastic card. $500. I had generated millions in revenue last year alone, and now I was being put on an allowance like a child. You cannot do this, I said. We already did, Ryan said, sitting back down in my chair. He looked comfortable there. Too comfortable. Now, Dad, why don't you go take a nap? You look tired. We have a lot of paperwork to get through here. I stood there for a long moment. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wanted to flip the desk. I wanted to grab Ryan by his collar and throw him out the window. I wanted to scream until the windows shattered. But I looked at them. I saw the smugness on their faces. They expected me to explode. They wanted me to explode. If I became violent, if I started breaking things, they would call the police. They would have proof that I was unstable. Proof that I was the crazy old man they claimed I was. I took a deep breath. I picked up the prepaid card. My fingers brushed against the cold plastic. I looked at Brenda. I will not forget this, I said quietly. She just laughed. That laugh, the one that told me she thought I was powerless. Oh, Harry, you will forget. Just like you forget to take your vitamins. Now run along. I turned and walked out of my office. I walked out of my house. I sat on the porch steps. The sun was still shining, but the world felt gray. They had taken my money. They had taken my company access. They had taken my dignity, but as I sat there gripping that plastic card, a cold resolve began to settle in my gut. They thought they had cut off the head of the lion. They thought I was a toothless old beast who would just lie down and die. They were wrong. I looked at the card again. $500. Okay, I could work with $500. I had started with less than that 40 years ago. They wanted to play a game. They wanted to see who was smarter, who was tougher. I put the card in my pocket. I did not go take a nap. I walked to my car. I needed to make a phone call, but not from my cell phone. They probably monitored that too. I needed a payphone if I could find one, or a burner phone. I needed to call the one person Ryan and Brenda had forgotten about. The one person who knew where the bodies were buried because he had helped me dig the holes. This was not the end. This was just the beginning. And as I started the engine of my car, I did not feel like an old man anymore. I felt like a soldier going back to the trenches. They wanted a war, I would give them a war. But they had made one fatal mistake. They assumed I had told them everything. They assumed they knew about all the accounts, all the assets, all the companies. They assumed wrong. I took the cheap plastic card from the desk. It felt light, flimsy, and insignificant in my hand. Just moments ago, I had walked in here a titan of industry, a man who commanded respect. Now I was holding a prepaid debit card like a teenager getting his first allowance. My thumb traced the raised numbers on the front. It was not even personalized. It just said, "Valued customer." That was what I had become in my own home. A customer. And a valued one only if I kept my mouth shut. Brenda watched me closely, her eyes narrowing as if she expected me to throw the card back in her face. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to snap it in half and toss the pieces onto the Persian rug. But I saw the way Ryan was looking at his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. He was ready to call someone. Maybe the family doctor. Maybe the police. They were waiting for an outburst to prove that old Harry was finally losing his marbles. I forced my hand to relax. I slid the card into my pocket next to the useless Platinum American Express. "Thank you, Brenda," I said. My voice was raspy but steady. "I suppose I should be grateful." "You should be," Ryan said, not looking up from the papers on my desk. He was shuffling through my quarterly reports documents he had never shown an interest in before today. "We are saving you from yourself, Dad. You have no idea how complex the new tax laws are. The lawyer explained it all this morning. If we keep the assets in your name, the inheritance tax will wipe us out. By transferring control to the trust now, we are protecting the family legacy. We are protecting you." I looked at my son. He was using words he had learned in a textbook, words he did not fully understand. Asset protection. Liability shielding. It sounded impressive if you did not know better. But I knew better. I had built this company when tax codes were written on typewriters. I had survived audits that would make a weaker man crumble. This was not about taxes. This was a hostile takeover. "So this is for taxes?" I asked, playing the part of the confused old man. I scratched my head, letting my shoulders slump a little. I did not realize the situation was so dire. "It is critical," Brenda said, leaning forward. Her tone softened, adopting that sickeningly sweet quality she used when she wanted something. "We are doing this because we love you. We do not want you to worry about bills or statements anymore. You have worked hard your whole life. It is time for you to rest. Let Ryan handle the stress. You just enjoy your retirement." She pointed a manicured finger at my pocket. "I put $500 on that card. Use it for the week. That should cover your little breakfasts and your newspapers." "But Harry, listen to me. Do not spend it on expensive cigars or that scotch you like. We are on a budget now. The restructuring requires us to be liquid. We cannot have you burning money literally and figuratively." A budget. The woman who bought a $5,000 handbag last month because she was bored was putting me on a budget. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my chest, a dark, dangerous laugh. I swallowed it down. $500, I repeated. "For the week, eh?" "Yes," she said firmly. "And if you run out, you will have to wait until next Tuesday for a reload. It will teach you some discipline." "You have been very reckless lately, Harry. Buying that old car parts online. Donating to that shelter without discussing it with us. It has to stop." I looked at the floor. I let them see a broken man. I let them see a husband who was beaten. Under my breath, I muttered, "I just wanted to fix the Mercedes." "The Mercedes is a money pit," Ryan said, finally looking up. His eyes were cold. "Maybe we should sell it. It takes up space in the garage that I could use for my new Porsche." My blood ran cold. The Mercedes was the first car I ever bought with my own money. I had restored it bolt by bolt. It was my sanctuary. "Please," I said, allowing a tremor into my voice. "Do not sell the car. It is all I have left to work on." Brenda waved her hand dismissively. "We will see, Harry. If you behave, if you stick to the budget. Now why don't you go upstairs? Ryan and I have a conference call with the investors in 10 minutes. You need to clear out." The investors. My investors. Men and women I had known for 30 years. Men who had shaken my hand and looked me in the eye. Were they in on this too? Or had Ryan and Brenda spun them a web of lies about my health? Had they told everyone I was senile? That I was unfit? I turned to leave. My feet felt heavy, like I was walking through wet concrete. I reached the door and paused my hand on the brass knob. I looked back at them. They had already forgotten I was there. Brenda was showing Ryan something on her tablet, and they were both laughing softly. They looked like conspirators celebrating a successful heist. And that is exactly what this was. A heist. They had stolen my life right out from under me while I was standing in the room. I walked out into the hallway and closed the door softly behind me. The click of the latch sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the scent of lemon polish and old wood. This house, which I had built to be a home, now felt like a prison, and I was the inmate. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the debit card again. $500. They thought this was my leash. They thought this allowance would keep me obedient. They thought that by taking away my credit cards, they had taken away my power. They were fools. They forgot that I started with nothing. They forgot that I built an empire with grit and 2 bare hands, not with platinum cards. I walked down the long hallway toward the kitchen. I needed to think. I needed a plan. The lie about the taxes was sloppy. If they were really restructuring for tax purposes, there would be paperwork for me to sign. There would be notaries. You cannot just take over a man's assets without his signature unless you have forged it. A chill went down my spine. Forgery. Ryan had been practicing my signature for years. He used to do it as a party trick when he was a teenager. "Look, Dad, I can sign your checks," he would say. We used to laugh about it. I was not laughing now. If they had used the power of attorney, they still needed medical documentation proving I was incompetent. Where did they get that? Unless they had paid off a doctor. The scale of their betrayal was beginning to sink in. It was not just greed. It was a conspiracy. They had planned this for months, maybe years. While I was working late to pay for their vacations, they were plotting how to cut me out. While I was teaching Ryan how to read a balance sheet, he was learning how to cook the books. I went into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of tap water. I stared at the reflection in the granite countertop. I looked old. My hair was gray, my face lined with wrinkles. But my eyes were clear. My mind was sharp. They had underestimated the most important thing about me: my will. I took a sip of water. It tasted like metal. "Don't spend it on cigars," Brenda had said. I smiled a grim, tight smile. I would not spend a dime of this $500 on cigars. I was going to spend it on something much more dangerous. I was going to spend it on the truth. I needed to get out of the house. I needed to get away from their prying eyes and their suffocating lies. I checked my watch. It was only 11 in the morning. I had time. I walked out the back door, avoiding the garage where my Mercedes sat. If I went near the car, Ryan might come out and start talking about selling it again, and I might lose control. I walked down the driveway, past the manicured hedges and the stone fountain. I walked out the front gate and onto the public sidewalk. I walked for 3 blocks until I reached the bus stop. I had not taken a bus in 20 years. But Harry Coleman was a man who adapted. I sat on the wooden bench and waited. When the bus arrived, I used a few dollars from the cash I had in my pocket. I did not want to use the debit card yet. They were probably tracking the transactions. If I used that card, they would know exactly where I was. I rode the bus downtown, blending in with the people. Tired nurses, students with headphones, construction workers covered in dust. These were my people. This was where I came from. Ryan and Brenda lived in a bubble of country clubs and private jets. They had forgotten what the real world looked like. I had not. I got off near the financial district. I stood on the corner looking up at the skyscrapers that pierced the clouds. Somewhere in one of those buildings was the truth. I needed to find out exactly what legal maneuvering they had used to lock me out. I needed to find out if my name was still on the deeds, on the titles, on the accounts. But I could not go to my usual lawyer. He was the family attorney Brenda had mentioned. He was compromised. If I went to him, he would call Ryan immediately. "Dad is here, he is asking questions." No. I needed someone outside the circle. Someone who owed me a favor. Someone who hated corruption as much as I did. I reached into my pocket and touched the debit card one more time. It was a symbol of their disrespect. But it was also my weapon. Because as long as they thought I was just surviving on their scraps, they would not be looking for me in the shadows. They thought I was defeated. They thought I was walking to the park to feed the pigeons. They did not know I was walking to war. I turned my collar up against the wind and started walking toward the older part of town, toward a small dusty law office that belonged to a man named Peterson. He was not fancy. He did not have a view of the lake, but he was the best forensic accountant I had ever known, and he had a grudge against the big firms. As I walked, I replayed Brenda's voice in my head. Use it for the week. I would make that $500 last, and I would make them pay for every single penny. The lie they had told me was a good one. It was plausible. It was detailed. But it had one flaw. They told it to the wrong man. The bus ride to the industrial park was a humiliation in itself, but I held my head high. I sat between a young mother struggling with a crying baby and a man who smelled of stale tobacco clutching my prepaid debit card like a lifeline. When the bus finally hissed to a halt 2 blocks from Coleman Construction, my legs felt stiff, but my resolve was harder than the concrete beneath my feet. I walked the familiar path, a path I had driven thousands of times in my truck, and then later in my Mercedes. The building rose up before me, a sturdy 3-story structure of brick and glass. Seeing it usually filled me with a deep, quiet pride. It was the physical manifestation of 40 years of sweat and sacrifice. But today, as I looked up at the sign Coleman Construction, I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. The sign was the same, but something about the place felt different. It felt hostile. I pushed through the glass double doors, expecting the familiar chime that announced a visitor. Instead, there was silence. The warm oak reception desk I had installed 20 years ago was gone. In its place stood a slab of cold white marble that looked more like a tombstone than a welcome station. And behind it sat a young woman I had never seen before. She was typing furiously on her phone, her long acrylic nails clicking against the screen. She did not look up when I entered. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice authoritative. She held up a finger, finishing her text message before slowly lifting her eyes. She looked at me with a blank, uninterested expression. "Can I help you, sir? Deliveries are around the back." "I am not a delivery driver," I said, stepping closer. "I am Harry Coleman. I am the owner of this company." She blinked, then typed something into her computer. "I do not see a Harry Coleman in the employee directory," she said, her voice dripping with artificial politeness. "Are you here to see someone specific? Do you have an appointment?" My blood began to boil. I built the walls she was sitting within. I paid for the electricity powering her computer. And she was asking if I had an appointment. "I do not need an appointment to enter my own building," I said, my voice rising. "Where is Sarah? Where is the receptionist who has worked here for 10 years? "Oh, Sarah was let go last week," the girl said, popping a piece of gum into her mouth. "Restructuring. I am Tiffany. If you do not have an appointment, sir, I am going to have to ask you to wait in the seating area while I call security." Security. We never had security. We were a family business. I ignored her and walked past the desk, heading straight for the hallway that led to the executive offices. "Sir, you cannot go back there," Tiffany shrieked, scrambling to grab her phone. I marched down the hallway. The walls used to be lined with photos of our projects. Bridges, schools, hospitals. Now the walls were bare. The photos were gone, replaced by abstract art that meant nothing. It was as if they were scrubbing the history from the building. I needed to see Frank. Frank Miller had been my chief financial officer for 30 years. He was the only man who knew the numbers better than I did. He was the moral compass of the company. If anyone could explain what was happening with the bank accounts, it was Frank. I reached the door at the end of the hall. The brass nameplate that used to say Frank Miller, CFO, was gone. In its place was a sticky note that said, "Acting Finance Director." I threw the door open without knocking. "Frank, we need to talk," I started to say. But the man sitting behind the desk was not Frank. He was young, maybe in his late 20s, with slicked back hair and a suit that cost more than my first car. He was shredding documents. The shredder was humming loudly, eating paper as fast as he could feed it. He jumped when I entered, looking like a deer caught in headlights. He quickly slammed his hand down on a folder covering whatever he was reading. "Who are you?" I demanded, stepping into the room. "Where is Frank?" The young man stood up, adjusting his tie. He had a nervous weasel-like quality to him. "You must be Mr. Coleman," he said, forcing a smile. "I heard you might be stopping by. I am Jason. Ryan hired me to modernize the accounts." "Modernize," I spat the word out. "Where is Frank?" Jason cleared his throat, his eyes darting to the door. Mr. Miller decided to take an early retirement. Effective immediately. He wanted to spend more time with his grandchildren. "Liar," I shouted. "Frank has no grandchildren. His wife died 5 years ago, and this job is his life. He would never leave in the middle of a fiscal quarter." "What did you do to him?" I walked around the desk. I wanted to see what was in that folder he was hiding. I wanted to see what he was shredding. "Sir, please, you cannot be back here," Jason stammered, backing away. "These are confidential documents." "Confidential from whom?" I roared. "I am the founder." I reached for the folder. Jason tried to block me, but he was frail. I shoved past him and grabbed the file. Before I could open it, the door behind me flew open. "Dad. What the hell are you doing?" It was Ryan. He stood in the doorway, his face red with anger. He wasn't wearing his jacket. He looked stressed, his hair slightly messy. 2 security guards I did not recognize were standing behind him. I turned to face my son, clutching the folder. "Where is Frank Ryan? Why is this child sitting in his office? Why is he shredding documents?" Ryan walked into the room and snatched the folder from my hand. He tossed it back onto the desk. "Frank was old, Dad. Just like you. He could not keep up with the new software. He was making mistakes. We gave him a generous severance package and sent him to Florida. It was time for fresh blood. Jason here is a wizard with international tax law." "Fresh blood," I said, looking at Jason, who was now smirking safely behind Ryan. "You mean someone who will do what he is told? Someone who does not ask questions? Frank would never have allowed you to block my cards. Frank would never have let you transfer assets without my signature." Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "This is exactly why you cannot come here anymore, Dad. You are paranoid. You are shouting at employees. You are disrupting the workflow. Look at Jason. He is terrified." I looked at Jason. He did not look terrified. He looked guilty. "I want to see the books, Ryan," I said, lowering my voice. "I want to see the ledgers for the last 6 months. If everything is above board, show me." Ryan laughed. It was a cruel, dismissive sound. "You would not understand them, Dad. It is all digital now. It is in the cloud. You barely know how to check your email. Go home. Go enjoy your retirement. Stop trying to micromanage a world you no longer belong in." "I am not going anywhere until I get answers," I said, planting my feet. Ryan nodded to the security guards. "Escort Mr. Coleman to the exit, please, and make sure he does not take anything with him." The 2 guards stepped forward. They were big men, their uniforms tight across their chests. They looked at me not with respect, but as a problem to be removed. "Mr. Coleman, please come with us," one of them said, reaching for my arm. "Do not touch me," I snapped, pulling away. I looked at Ryan. He was checking his watch as if getting his father thrown out of the building was just another item on his to-do list. "You are making a mistake, Ryan," I said. "A very big mistake." Ryan did not even look up. "Goodbye, Dad. Take the bus home. It builds character." I walked out of the office, the guards flanking me on either side like I was a criminal being transferred to a cell. We walked past the open doors of other offices. Employees, people I had hired, people whose families I knew looked up and then quickly looked away. They were afraid. They saw what was happening. If the founder could be dragged out, none of them were safe. We reached the lobby. Tiffany, the receptionist, watched with a smug little smile as the guards pushed the glass doors open for me. "Have a nice day, sir," she called out, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I stumbled out onto the sidewalk. The heat of the afternoon sun hit me, but I felt cold inside. The doors clicked shut behind me, locking automatically. I stood there staring at the glass. I could see my reflection. I looked disheveled. My tie was crooked. I looked like a crazy old man who had caused a scene. But as I straightened my tie and smoothed my jacket, my mind was racing. Frank was not retired. Frank was forced out. You do not fire a loyal CFO unless he refuses to do something illegal. And you do not hire a nervous kid who shreds documents unless you have something to hide. Ryan said I was bothering the staff. He said I was disrupting the workflow. He was right. I was disrupting their plan. I walked away from this building, not toward the bus stop, but toward a small diner down the street where Frank used to eat lunch every Tuesday. If he was really in Florida, he would not be there. But if he was scared, if he was hiding, he might be close by. Ryan thought he had won this round. He thought that by kicking me out, he had blinded me. But he had done the opposite. He had confirmed everything. The closed doors, the new staff, the shredder. It all pointed to one thing. They were not just stealing my money. They were using my company to commit a crime. I touched the debit card in my pocket. I had been kicked out of my castle, but I was not out of the fight. I needed to find Frank. And if I found him, I knew exactly what he would tell me. The rot was deep, and I was the only one who could cut it out. The sun had set by the time I returned home from the diner, casting long, jagged shadows across the lawn. I used to mow myself on weekends. I walked into the house that the silence from earlier replaced by the clattering of silverware and the hum of conversation. Dinner was being served. In the past, this was my favorite time of day. It was when the noise of the construction sites faded away, and I could just be a husband and a father. But as I walked into the dining room, I realized that life was gone. I was walking into a shark tank. My mother-in-law, Agnes, was sitting at the head of the table, my seat. She was 80 years old, a woman who had never worked a day in her life, but had strong opinions on how everyone else should work. She was wearing a silk blouse that I knew cost more than the first car I ever bought. Her fingers were dripping with rings, her hair perfectly coiffed. When she saw me enter, she did not smile. She just raised a painted eyebrow, looking at me as if I were a waiter who had brought the wrong order. "You are late, Harry," she said, her voice sharp and scratchy. "We started without you. The soup is cold." I looked around the table. Brenda was there, sipping wine. Ryan was there, scrolling on his phone. Nobody looked up. There was a place set for me, but it was on the side, squeezed between the sideboard and a large vase of flowers. They had physically moved me from the head of the table. The symbolism was not subtle. I sat down. The chair was different, too. It was one of the extra folding chairs we used for large parties, not my high-backed leather chair. I looked at my plate. A small piece of dry chicken and some wilted salad. Then I looked at the center of the table. There was a bottle of wine breathing in a crystal decanter. I recognized the label immediately. It was a Chateau Margaux, a vintage I had been saving for my 50th wedding anniversary. A bottle worth $2,000. I watched Brenda pour a generous glass for Agnes. The deep red liquid swirled in the crystal. "I see we are celebrating," I said, unfolding my napkin. Agnes took a sip, closing her eyes dramatically. "It is decent," she said, smacking her lips. "A bit oaky, but it will do, Brenda darling. Pass the bread." I felt a vein throb in my temple. Decent. She was drinking liquid gold and calling it decent. I looked at Brenda. "I thought we were on a budget," I said, keeping my voice even. You gave me a prepaid card with $500 for the week. You told me not to buy cigars, yet you are drinking a $2,000 bottle of wine on a Tuesday night. Brenda sighed, putting her glass down with a heavy clink. Oh, Harry, do not start. Agnes is a guest. We cannot serve her box wine. Besides, this was already in the cellar. We did not spend money to buy it. It is inventory. Inventory, I repeated. It is my collection. It is the family's collection. Ryan chimed in, his mouth full of potatoes. Stop being so possessive, Dad. It is unattractive. Agnes let out a short, harsh laugh. Possessive. That is a funny word coming from you, Harry. She turned her cold, watery eyes toward me. You know you should be thanking Brenda. She is trying to save you from ruin. But all you do is complain. You walk in here late looking like a vagrant and immediately start counting pennies. It is distinctively lower class. I gripped my fork. I had paid for Agnes's hip surgery. I had paid for her condo in Florida. I had paid for her late husband's funeral when he died with nothing but gambling debts. And now I was lower class. I am just asking for consistency, Agnes, I said, forcing myself to eat a piece of the dry chicken. If I am being treated like a child with an allowance, I expect the rest of the household to tighten their belts too. The table went silent. Agnes slowly lowered her fork. She looked at Brenda, then at Ryan, and then finally she fixed her gaze on me. It was a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. Tighten our belts, she scoffed. Harry, look at yourself. You are old. You are useless. You do not bring anything to this table anymore. You do not run the company. Ryan does. You do not manage the house. Brenda does. You are just a mouth to feed. She took another sip of my wine, swirling it around her mouth before swallowing. You should know your place, Harry, she continued, her voice dripping with venom. In the wild, the old lions are left behind to starve. We are being kind enough to keep you indoors. But do not mistake our charity for equality. You are a guest here now, and a very expensive one at that. I looked at Brenda. I waited for her to defend me. I waited for her to say, Fom, stop it. Harry worked for 40 years to buy this food. I waited for Ryan to say, Grandma, that is too far. He is my father. But nobody said a word. Brenda looked down at her plate, a small smile playing on her lips, as if she was enjoying seeing me cut down to size. Ryan just smirked, shaking his head, as if agreeing with every word. Actually, Agnes said, leaning forward, her eyes gleaming. You are not even a guest. A guest is invited. You are more like a freeloader. Yes, that is the word. A freeloader living off the success of his wife and son. Freeloader. The word hung in the air like a foul smell. Brenda covered her mouth to hide a giggle. Ryan chuckled openly. A freeloader, he repeated. That is a good one, Grandma. The old man is a freeloader. They laughed. All three of them. They sat in the house I built, eating the food I bought, or drinking the wine I saved, and they laughed at me. They laughed at the man whose calloused hands had paid for every single spoon on that table. I felt something break inside me, but it was not my heart. It was the last chain of loyalty I had to these people. If I had any doubts before, if I had any lingering hope that this was just a misunderstanding or a temporary insanity, it was gone now. You do not call the man who feeds you a freeloader unless you have completely lost your soul. I did not scream. I did not flip the table. I did not throw the wine in Agnes's face, even though the urge was strong. Instead, I carefully placed my fork and knife on the plate. I wiped my mouth with the linen napkin. I looked at them, really looked at them. They were ugly. Not physically, perhaps, but their spirits were rot. They were vultures pecking at a living body, thinking it was a corpse. You are right, Agnes, I said softly. The laughter died down, replaced by confused silence. They expected me to fight back, to yell. My calmness unnerved them. "I am right?" Agnes asked, narrowing her eyes. "Yes," I said. "I have been resting on my laurels. I have let Ryan and Brenda take on so much of the burden. Maybe I have become comfortable. I suppose I should be grateful that you are all willing to manage the complexities of my wealth while I just sit here." Brenda relaxed her shoulders, dropping. She thought I had broken. She thought I was accepting my defeat. "Well, I am glad you finally see it that way, Harry," she said, pouring herself more wine. "We just want what is best for everyone." I stood up. I picked up my plate. "Where are you going?" Ryan asked. "I am going to put my dishes in the dishwasher," I said. Like a good freeloader. I would not want to burden the maid. I walked into the kitchen. As the swinging door closed behind me, I heard them start talking again. Their voices were light, happy. They were discussing a vacation to Italy in the fall. They were spending money they thought they had secured. I stood over the sink, staring at the dirty plate. My reflection in the dark window looked back at me. I looked tired, yes, but I also looked dangerous. Agnes had called me an old lion left to starve. She forgot one thing. Old lions are the most dangerous because they have nothing left to lose, and they know how to hunt in the dark. I washed the plate. I dried it. I put it away. Freeloader. I repeated the word in my mind. I would tattoo that word onto my brain. I would use it as fuel. Every time I felt tired, every time I felt like giving up in the days to come, I would remember Agnes's face and that word. I walked back through the dining room without looking at them. "Good night," I said. "Good night, Harry," Agnes said dismissively, not even turning her head. "Try to wake up earlier tomorrow. Sleeping in is for people who have jobs." I climbed the stairs to the guest room where I had been sleeping for the past month since Brenda said my snoring was bothering her. I closed the door and locked it. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out the prepaid debit card. $500. And then I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper I had taken from the trash can in the diner near my office. It was a phone number. Frank's sister's number. I had remembered it from a Christmas card years ago. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot I had. They called me a freeloader. They thought I was powerless. Tomorrow I would show them what a freeloader could do. I would show them that while they were drinking my wine, I was sharpening my knives. The dinner was over. The game was just beginning. And unlike them, I was not playing for money. I was playing for my life. The house was silent, a rare and heavy silence that felt like the calm before a storm. Brenda had gone to her weekly spa appointment, a $300 facial that she claimed was essential for her stress, paid for no doubt, with money from the accounts I could no longer access. Ryan had left an hour ago in his Porsche tires screeching as he peeled out of the driveway, likely heading to a lunch meeting where he would pretend to be the brilliant mind behind Coleman Construction. Agnes was upstairs in her suite, the heavy sound of her snoring drifting down the staircase. I stood in the hallway, listening. The grandfather clock I had bought in Germany 30 years ago ticked rhythmically. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It was counting down the time I had left to save my life. I knew I had a window of maybe 2 hours. It was not much, but for a man who had built skyscrapers on tight deadlines, it was enough. I walked to the double oak doors of my home office. My office. I corrected myself in my head. It was Ryan's office now, according to them. He had even put a new keypad lock on the door handle, a high-tech digital thing that glowed with a soft blue light. He thought he was so clever. He thought a battery-operated toy would keep me out. He forgot that I was a builder. He forgot that I knew exactly how these door frames were constructed because I had framed them myself. I did not bother with the keypad. I went to the garage and retrieved a thin, flathead screwdriver and a small pry bar. I returned to the door. I wedged the screwdriver into the gap between the frame and the latch mechanism. I applied pressure, feeling the wood give slightly. I knew exactly where the weakness was. With a sharp, decisive thrust, I popped the latch mechanism. The door swung open with a groan. I stepped inside. The room smelled different. It used to smell of old paper and leather. Now it smelled of Ryan's cloying cologne and stale energy drinks. I walked to the desk, my mahogany desk. The surface was cluttered with papers, but I knew the real secrets would not be left out in the open. I tried the drawers. Locked. Of course. I looked at the top drawer. This was where I used to keep the sensitive contracts. I positioned the pry bar under the lip of the drawer. I did not care about the varnish anymore. I did not care about preserving the finish. This furniture, this house, it was all just wood and stone. My legacy was the only thing that mattered now. I pushed down on the bar. There was a loud crack as the wood splintered and the lock gave way. I pulled the drawer open. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from anticipation. I began to sift through the files. At first, it looked like standard business, invoices, payroll. But then tucked at the very back, beneath a stack of old blueprints, I found a thick manila envelope. It had no label. I opened it. The first document made my blood run cold. It was a draft for a reverse mortgage on the estate. Not just a small loan, but a complete leveraging of the entire property value. They were cashing out the equity of the home I intended to leave to my grandchildren, if I ever had any. I flipped the page. There was a timeline attached. The disbursement date was set for next week. I kept reading. My hands began to shake, and I had to place the papers on the desk to steady them. The next document was a letter from a law firm I did not recognize. The letterhead was from a firm in Panama. Subject: asset liquidation and offshore transfer. I read the words, but my brain refused to process them at first. It was too evil. It was too calculated. The letter outlined a plan to sell the heavy machinery of Coleman Construction, the cranes, the bulldozers, the trucks, to a shell company for pennies on the dollar. That shell company was registered in the Cayman Islands. And the sole beneficiary of that shell company was not the Coleman Family Trust. It was Ryan Coleman. They were gutting the company. They were stripping it for parts like a stolen car in a chop shop. They had no intention of running the business. They knew they were incompetent. They knew they could not land the big contracts. So they decided to sell everything I had built, hide the cash offshore, and let the company declare bankruptcy in the United States. I felt a wave of nausea. This was not just theft. This was murder. They were murdering my reputation. They were murdering the livelihoods of the 200 employees who worked for me. And they were doing it all while I sat in the next room eating dry chicken and worrying about a $500 allowance. But the worst was yet to come. I found a crumpled email printout at the bottom of the envelope. It was an exchange between Ryan and a doctor whose name I recognized, a psychiatrist known for being purchasable. The email read, "The evaluation is scheduled for the 25th. Once you sign the competency declaration stating that Harry is suffering from advanced dementia, we can expedite the power of attorney to full guardianship. We have found a facility in the state that accepts state-funded patients. It is budget-friendly, which will help with our cash flow issues." I stared at the paper. A budget-friendly facility. State-funded. They were not just going to steal my money. They were going to throw me into a warehouse for the forgotten elderly. They were going to lock me away in some hellhole where I would rot medicated and drooling while they sipped margaritas on a beach in the Caribbean, paid for with my life's work. I felt tears prick my eyes. Hot, angry tears. I had changed Ryan's diapers. I had taught him to ride a bike. I had paid for his mistakes, bailed him out of trouble, given him a seat at the table. And this was his repayment: a cheap nursing home and a shallow grave. I wiped my eyes. There was no time for sorrow. Sorrow was a luxury for men who were safe. I was in a war zone. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the cheap smartphone I had bought with cash at the convenience store yesterday. I had hidden it in my sock drawer. I turned on the camera. My hands were steady now. The anger had crystallized into something hard and cold like diamond. Click. I took a photo of the mortgage draft. Click. I took a photo of the Panama Papers. Click. I took a photo of the email about the nursing home. I photographed every single page. I made sure the dates and signatures were clear. I captured the evidence of their betrayal in high definition. I was about to put the papers back when I saw something else in the trash can next to the desk. It was a glossy brochure crumpled up. I smoothed it out. It was a brochure for a luxury yacht. The price was circled in red marker, $12 million. Beside it in Ryan's handwriting were the words, Freedom, ETA 30 days. 30 days. That was their timeline. That was how long I had before they pulled the trigger on the bankruptcy and shipped me off to the asylum. I carefully arranged the papers back in the envelope. I placed it back in the drawer exactly as I had found it. I pushed the drawer shut. The broken lock would be noticeable if they looked closely, but I gambled that Ryan was too lazy to check. He was arrogant. He thought I was defeated. He would never imagine that the freeloader was conducting a forensic investigation in his own office. I pushed the chair back and stood up. I looked around the room one last time. It did not feel like my office anymore. It felt like a crime scene. And in a way it was. They had killed the father and husband I used to be. I walked out of the office and pulled the doors shut. I used the screwdriver to jam the latch back into a semi-locked position. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold. I went back to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water. My throat was dry as dust. I looked out the window at the sprawling lawn. I saw the swing set I had built for Ryan when he was 5. It was rusty now, covered in vines. They wanted to put me in a home. They wanted to declare me incompetent. I took a sip of water. I checked the time. Brenda would be back in 20 minutes. I needed to be sitting in the living room reading a newspaper, looking like the confused, obedient old man they wanted me to be. I went to the living room and sat in my armchair. I opened the newspaper, but I did not read the words. My mind was already 3 moves ahead. They had a plan, a 30-day plan. Well, I had a plan too, and my plan did not end with me in a nursing home. My plan ended with them in a cell. I felt the burner phone in my pocket. It felt heavy like a loaded gun. I had the evidence. Now I needed the executioner. I needed Peterson. I needed to get these photos to him today. The sound of the garage door opening rumbled through the floorboards. Brenda was home. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, feigning sleep. But under my eyelids, I was wide awake. The lion was not sleeping. The lion was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when I did, I would make sure they never saw it coming. The game had changed. They were playing for money. I was playing for justice. And justice, I had decided, would be served cold. I waited until the house settled into a heavy afternoon silence. Brenda was upstairs, likely applying cucumbers to her eyes, and the servants were on their break. I slipped out the side door, the one near the pantry that squeaked if you did not lift the handle just right. I knew every quirk of this house because I had paid for every beam and brick. I walked down the long driveway past the manicured hedges that Ryan claimed cost too much to maintain, and out onto the main road. I did not take my Mercedes. I did not call a taxi. I walked to the bus stop again. The ride to the city was long, but it gave me time to compose myself. I sat in the back watching the city skyline approach. Ryan and Brenda thought my world ended at the gates of our estate. They thought my power was limited to the bank accounts they had frozen. They were about to learn a very painful lesson about the difference between being rich and being wealthy. Rich is having a platinum card. Wealth is owning the bank that issues it. I got off the bus in the financial district, but I did not head toward the flashy glass tower where Coleman Construction was housed. That building with its chrome lobby and rude receptionists was just a facade. It was the public face of my business, the part I let the world see, the part I let Ryan play with. I walked 2 blocks east to a building that most people would walk past without a second glance. It was a pre-war structure, limestone and granite, with small windows and a heavy iron door. There was no sign outside, no logo, just a small brass number plate polished to a shine. Number 440. I pushed the heavy door open and stepped into the lobby. It was cool and smelled of old money leather, beeswax, and silence. There was no pop music playing. There were no teenagers chewing gum behind the desk. A large man in a dark suit stood by the elevator. He saw me and immediately straightened his posture. He did not ask for ID. He did not ask if I had an appointment. He simply nodded, a gesture of deep, genuine respect. "Good afternoon, Mr. Coleman," he said, his voice low. "It is good to see you, sir." "Good afternoon, James," I replied. "Is Peterson upstairs?" "He is waiting for you in the boardroom, sir. The private elevator is ready." James pressed the button for me. As the doors closed, shutting out the world, I felt my shoulders relax for the first time in 2 days. In my own house, I was a freeloader. In my son's office, I was a nuisance. But here, in the heart of the beast, I was the king. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse office that spanned the entire top floor. This was the headquarters of HC Holdings, my real company, the entity that nobody in my family knew existed. Peterson was standing by the window looking out at the city. He turned as I entered. He was a man of my generation, sharp as a tack, wearing a suit that cost more than Ryan's Porsche. He did not look at me with pity. He looked at me with the focused intensity of a general waiting for orders. "Harry," he said, walking over and shaking my hand firmly. "I got your message. You look like hell." They cut off my cards. "Peterson," I said, walking over to the large oak conference table. "They put me on a $500 allowance, and they are planning to put me in a state-run nursing home in 30 days. Peterson's face darkened. He did not say a word. He walked to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of scotch. He slid one across the table to me. "Drink," he said. "You are going to need it." I took a sip. It burned pleasantly, waking up my senses. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the cheap burner phone. I slid it across the table. "The evidence is on there," I said. "Photos of the mortgage draft, the offshore accounts in Panama, the emails with that corrupt psychiatrist. They are gutting Coleman Construction. They are selling the equipment and funneling the money to Ryan's shell company." Peterson picked up the phone and scrolled through the images. His eyebrows went up. "They are sloppy," he muttered. "Greedy and sloppy. They did not even bother to use encrypted email. They are treating this like a smash-and-grab robbery." He put the phone down and looked at me. "So they think they are stealing the company," he said. "They think they are stealing everything." I corrected him. "The house, the cars, the business. They think they have won." Peterson smiled then. It was a shark's smile. He walked over to a large covered easel in the corner of the room. He pulled the sheet off. Underneath was a complex organizational chart. "It is time to remind you of what you actually own, Harry, because I think in your kindness you might have forgotten how well we insulated you." He pointed to a small box at the very bottom of the chart. It was labeled Coleman Construction, LLC. "This is what Ryan is fighting over," Peterson said. "This is the company that builds the bridges and paves the roads. It has assets of about $30 million. It is a nice little business." He paused, then moved his pointer stick up to the massive box at the top of the chart. the one that branched out into dozens of other lines. And this, Peterson said, his voice dropping an octave, is HC Holdings. I looked at the chart. I knew it, of course. I had designed it. But seeing it laid out like this brought a fresh wave of clarity. HC Holdings, Peterson continued, is the parent company. It owns 100% of the shares of Coleman Construction. But it also owns the land that the Coleman Construction office sits on. It owns the leasing company that holds the title to every single crane and bulldozer Ryan is trying to sell. He tapped the chart again. And the house, Harry. The estate. Who owns the deed to the estate? HC Holdings, I said softly. Correct, Peterson said. You transferred the deed 10 years ago for liability protection. You and Brenda are technically tenants. You pay zero rent, but you do not own the bricks. HC Holdings does. And the cars I asked even though I knew the answer. Company vehicles, Peterson said. Leased to Coleman Construction by HC Holdings. He sat down opposite me, leaning forward. Do you understand what this means, Harry? Ryan and Brenda are trying to sell assets they do not own. They are trying to mortgage a house they are renting. They are trying to sell trucks that belong to a leasing corporation. They are not master criminals. They are children trying to sell the school furniture because they think it belongs to them just because they sit at the desks. I looked at the chart. My empire. $500 million in real estate, intellectual property, and diversified investments. Coleman Construction. The company Ryan was willing to kill me for was just a drop in the bucket. It was maybe 5% of my net worth. They do not know, I said. How could they? Peterson replied. You never told them. You wanted them to build their own character. You wanted Ryan to work for the construction company to learn the value of $1. You never told him that the construction company was just the training wheels. I felt a heavy sadness settle in my chest. I had tested them. I had given them a little bit of power to see what they would do with it. And instead of growing, they had turned into monsters. I had hoped that one day I could bring Ryan here to this office and show him the true extent of his inheritance. I wanted to see his eyes light up. I wanted to say, "Son, this is all yours." But now that would never happen. So Peterson said, breaking the silence, we have a situation where the subsidiary management, your wife and son, are engaging in massive corporate fraud and theft against the parent company. Yes, I said. And since you are the sole shareholder of HC Holdings, they are stealing directly from you. But they are doing it in a way that exposes them to federal charges. Wire fraud, bank fraud, conspiracy. Peterson opened a file folder on the table. I have taken the liberty of preparing 2 paths, Harry, he said. Path A is the gentle path. We reveal the corporate structure. We show them they own nothing. We fire them, cut them off, and let them find real jobs. No jail time, just poverty. He looked at me closely. And Path B? Path B is the nuclear option, Peterson said. We let them proceed. We let them try to sell the equipment. We let them try to sign the mortgage papers. We let them commit the crime fully. And then once the ink is dry, we drop the hammer. We bring in the forensic auditors. We bring in the FBI. We charge them with grand larceny and corporate espionage. We strip them of everything and send them to prison. I stared at the amber liquid in my glass. I thought about the dinner last night. I thought about Agnes calling me a freeloader. I thought about Brenda telling me to beg for breakfast money. I thought about the nursing home brochure. They were not going to show me mercy. They were going to lock me away until I died. They were willing to erase my existence for money. I looked up at Peterson. How long until they try to finalize the sale of the equipment, I asked. According to the emails you found, the buyers from the Cayman Islands are expecting the contracts. In 3 days, Peterson said. 3 days, I repeated. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked down at the city. Somewhere down there, Ryan was probably bragging to his friends about how he had finally taken control. "Peterson," I said, my voice steady. "Yes, Harry." "Prepare Path B," I said. "But I want to add a twist. I want to be the one to catch them. I want to look them in the eye when the handcuffs go on." Peterson nodded slowly. He picked up his pen. "We will need a forensic audit of the Coleman Construction servers," he said. "We need to trace every penny they have moved in the last 6 months. Can you get us access?" I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt in days. "I hired the IT director of Coleman Construction 15 years ago," I said. "He thinks I am a Luddite who doesn't know how to use a mouse. But I paid for his daughter's leukemia treatment out of my own pocket. He is loyal to me, not to Ryan." "Then we have everything we need," Peterson said. I finished my scotch. I felt strong. I felt ready. "I am going back to the house," I said. "I have to play the part of the confused old man for a few more days. I have to let them think they are winning." "Be careful," Harry Peterson warned. "When rats are cornered, they bite." I put the burner phone back in my pocket. "They are not rats, Peterson," I said, turning to the elevator. "They are just parasites. And I have just found the cure." I rode the elevator down. I walked back out onto the street. The sun was shining, but for my family, the long winter was just beginning. They wanted the money. They wanted the power. Well, they were about to get the full weight of it crashing down on their heads. I sat in the plush leather chair of my real office at HC Holdings, the one my family didn't know existed. The city skyline sprawled out before me, a testament to what focus and discipline could build. But my mind wasn't on the view. It was on the betrayal happening in my own home. Peterson, my attorney and oldest friend, sat across from me, his expression grave. He had just finished laying out the legal framework for what we were about to do. It was ruthless. It was necessary. "You know, Peterson," I said, my voice low, "this whole thing giving them the reins of Coleman Construction, it was never about retiring. It was a test." Peterson nodded slowly. "A loyalty test." "Yes," I replied. "I wanted to see if they could handle a little bit of power without losing their souls. I wanted to see if Ryan had the integrity to run a business that employs 200 families. I wanted to see if Brenda could be a partner, not just a spender." I took a deep breath. The air in the room felt heavy. They failed Peterson. They failed so spectacularly that it is almost impressive. I gave them a company worth $30 million, a golden goose, and their first instinct wasn't to feed it. It was to kill it and sell the meat. Peterson leaned forward, his hands clasped on the polished oak table. "It is worse than failure, Harry. It is criminal negligence. And now, with this offshore scheme, it is active fraud. If we do not stop them, they will not just bankrupt the company. They will implicate you." "I know," I said. "That is why we are done playing games." I picked up the phone on the desk. It was a secure line. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. "Sterling Security," the voice said. "This is Harry Coleman," I said. "Authentication code Alpha 709er. There was a pause, then a shift in the tone. "Mr. Coleman, how can we assist you, sir?" "I need the ghost team," I said. "Tonight. Coleman Construction servers, full forensic audit. I want every email, every transaction, every deleted file from the last 6 months. And I want it done without tripping the internal alarms." "Understood, sir. We will have a team in the system within the hour. Do we have authorization to bypass the CFO's firewalls?" "You have authorization to burn the firewalls down if you have to," I said. "Just get me the evidence. I want to know where every single cent has gone. I want to know who signed the checks. I want to know who authorized the equipment transfers. Consider it done." I hung up the phone. Peterson looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You are unleashing the hounds," he said. They are not hounds. Peterson, I said, standing up and walking to the window. They are surgeons. They are going to cut out the cancer that has infected my company. Ryan thinks he is smart because he hired some kid to shred paper. He doesn't realize that digital footprints never disappear. He thinks he can hide money in the Cayman Islands. He doesn't know that I have people who can find a dime in a desert. I turned back to face him. This is the part that hurts Peterson. Ryan is my son. I changed his diapers. I taught him how to throw a baseball. I paid for his mistakes when he was a teenager. I always thought he would grow out of it. I thought he would eventually become a man. Peterson poured me another splash of scotch. Some men never grow up, Harry. They just get older and more expensive. I took the glass, but didn't drink. I stared at the amber liquid. I remember when he was 10, I said softly. He stole a candy bar from the corner store. I made him go back, return it, and apologize to the owner. He cried. He said he was sorry. I thought he learned his lesson about taking things that don't belong to him. I swirled the glass. Now he is trying to steal a $30 million company. And he is not sorry. He is just greedy. And Brenda, she is not a victim here. She is the architect. She is the one pushing him. She is the one who wants the lifestyle without the work. I set the glass down with a sharp click. Enough nostalgia. We have work to do. Peterson opened his laptop. The audit team will need about 24 hours to build a complete case, he said. They will map out the flow of funds. They will identify the shell companies. They will match the timestamps on the transfers with Ryan's login activity. By tomorrow night, we will have a dossier that could put them away for 20 years. Good, I said. But I need more than just financial records. I need proof of the conspiracy. I need to link them to the doctor. I need to prove they were planning to declare me incompetent. The team will scrape their personal emails too, Peterson said. If they used company devices or the company Wi-Fi, we will find it. I nodded. I felt a cold resolve settling over me. The sadness was fading, replaced by the familiar clarity of a job that needed doing. What about the banks? I asked. I have already drafted the letters, Peterson said. As soon as you give the signal, we will freeze the assets of Coleman Construction. We will alert the lenders that the mortgage applications are fraudulent. We will notify the Cayman authorities that the incoming funds are proceeds of crime. Not yet, I said. Wait until the audit is finished. I want them to think they are safe for a few more days. I want them to sign the final papers. I want them to commit the crime fully. Peterson raised an eyebrow. That is dangerous, Harry. If they move the money fast enough. They won't, I interrupted. They are arrogant. They think I am a senile old man who is worried about his breakfast money. They think you are out of the picture. They think they have all the time in the world. I walked over to the organizational chart Peterson had shown me earlier. I traced the line from HC Holdings down to Coleman Construction. I built this, I said. I built it with sweat and blood. I will not let them tear it down for a quick buck. I looked at Peterson. When this is over, Peterson, I am going to make some changes. Big changes. What kind of changes? He asked. I am going to find people who actually care, I said. People like Frank. I am going to bring him back. And I am going to look for young people, hungry people who want to build something real. Not just people who want to inherit it. Peterson smiled. That sounds like a plan, Harry. I checked my watch. I had to get back to the house. I had to go back to being the confused, defeated old man. I had to sit at that dinner table and listen to their lies. I had to watch them spend my money and insult my intelligence. It would be the hardest acting job of my life. I grabbed my coat. Peterson, I said at the door. Make sure the audit team looks for jewelry purchases. Jewelry, Peterson asked. Yes, I said. Brenda has been wearing a new diamond bracelet. And I saw Megan, my daughter-in-law, with a new watch. I have a feeling those weren't bought with their own savings. I will add it to the list, Peterson said. I walked out of the office and into the private elevator. As the doors closed, I felt a strange sense of peace. The machine was in motion. The gears were turning. The trap was set. They wanted to treat me like a child. They wanted to put me in a corner. Well, they were about to find out that nobody puts Harry Coleman in a corner. I stepped out into the lobby and nodded to James, the security guard. "Have a good evening, Mr. Coleman," he said. "I will, James," I said. "I really will." I walked out into the cool evening air. The city lights were coming on. It was beautiful. I caught the bus back to the suburbs. I sat in the back again. I looked at the people around me. Regular people. Honest people. People who worked for their money. I felt closer to them than I did to my own family. When I got off the bus, I walked the last mile to the estate. My legs were tired, but my spirit was soaring. I walked up the driveway. The house was lit up like a Christmas tree. I could see shadows moving in the dining room. They were probably opening another bottle of my wine. They were probably toasting to their success. I let myself in the side door. I could hear their laughter. It sounded shrill and hollow. I walked into the kitchen. The chef, a good man named Marco, was preparing dessert. He looked at me with sad eyes. "Mr. Coleman," he said quietly, "would you like some dinner? I saved you a plate of the roast beef before they finished it." "Thank you, Marco," I said, patting him on the shoulder. "You are a good man." I took the plate. I didn't go into the dining room. I went up the back stairs to my room. I sat on the bed and ate the cold roast beef. It was delicious. My phone buzzed. A text from Peterson. "Team is in. Extracting data now. It's worse than we thought." I smiled. Let it be worse, I thought. The worse it is, the harder they will fall. I finished my dinner and lay back on the pillows. I closed my eyes. I could hear Ryan's voice downstairs, loud and booming. "To the future," he shouted. I whispered into the darkness. "Yes, son, to the future. My future. Without you." The scratching of my fountain pen against the heavy bond paper was the only sound in the room. It was a rhythmic, deliberate sound, like the sharpening of a blade. I was sitting in the private conference room at the bank, a place with marble floors and ceilings so high they made you feel small. But I did not feel small today. I felt immense. Across from me sat Mr. Sterling, the senior vice president of commercial lending. He was a man who had known me for 30 years, a man who knew exactly where the bodies were buried because he had helped finance the shovels. He watched me sign the final document with a look of professional detachment, but I could see the curiosity dancing in his eyes. "There," I said, capping the pen with a satisfying click. "That reinforces the title deeds." Mr. Sterling pulled the stack of papers toward him. He adjusted his glasses and scanned the signatures. "So just to be absolutely clear for the record, Harry, you are reaffirming that the residential property located at 4400 Lakeview Drive and the commercial building at 101 Industrial Way are sole assets of HC Holdings." "Correct," I said, leaning back in the leather chair. And Sterling continued, his voice dropping a decibel. "You are confirming that the occupants of said residential property, namely Brenda Coleman, Ryan Coleman, and their extended family, have no legal claim to the title and are in effect tenants at will." "They are guests," I corrected him, my voice cold. "Guests who have overstayed their welcome, and guests who have violated the terms of their stay by attempting to sell the furniture." Sterling nodded slowly. He stamped the document. The red ink of the seal looked like blood on the white paper. "That makes the next document legally binding, then." He slid a single sheet of paper across the mahogany table. It was the eviction notice. It was a standard form, brutal in its simplicity. "Notice to vacate. It gave the occupants exactly 60 minutes to remove their personal effects from the premises before the locks were changed and law enforcement was contacted. 60 minutes to pack a lifetime of lies. I stared at the paper. I thought about the house. I had designed that house. I had picked out the marble for the foyer. I had chosen the spot for the garden where Ryan used to play. Signing this felt like burning down a church, but they had already desecrated the altar. They had turned my home into a den of thieves. I picked up the pen again. My hand hovered over the signature line. For a second, just a split second, I hesitated. I saw Ryan's face when he was a boy looking up at me with wide, innocent eyes. But then that image was replaced by the face of the man who had sat in my office and laughed while he planned to send me to a state asylum. The hesitation vanished. I signed my name. The lines were sharp, jagged. "The eviction is drafted," Sterling said, sliding the paper into a folder marked confidential. Now about the credit lines. This was the part I had been waiting for. This was the moment I tightened the noose. "I want a total freeze," I said. Sterling opened his laptop and typed in a sequence of security codes. "Let's review the exposure. Brenda has a black card linked to the main HC Holdings operational account. Ryan has a platinum business card and 3 subsidiary cards for his wife and personal expenses. They also have access to the corporate expense account for travel and dining." "Limitless," I muttered. "They think the money falls from the sky." "As of this morning, their combined spending for the month is over $80,000, Sterling said, looking at the screen. "Mostly designer clothing, jewelry, and a deposit on a rental villa in Tuscany." "Tuscany," I let out a dry, humorless laugh. They were planning a victory lap before they had even won the race. "I want you to set a kill switch," I said. "I want every single card, every single line of credit, and every access code to be terminated simultaneously. Not a decline for insufficient funds. I want the system to flag the cards as stolen. I want the merchants to be instructed to confiscate the physical cards if they try to use them." Sterling typed for a moment, then looked up. "We can schedule that. When do you want the blackout to hit?" I looked at my watch. I calculated the timeline. Peterson's team would be finishing the forensic audit by tomorrow morning. The buyers for the equipment were expecting the contracts to be signed tomorrow afternoon. Ryan and Brenda would be feeling invincible. They would be celebrating. "Tomorrow at noon," I said. 12 o'clock sharp. That is 0 hour. Sterling nodded. 0 hour. At 12 p.m. Tomorrow, they will be financially insolvent. They will not be able to buy a stick of gum. And the mortgage applications I asked. Flagged, Sterling confirmed. The moment they try to close on the reverse mortgage or the equipment sale, the system will trigger a fraud alert. The banks will not just deny the loan. They will freeze the application and notify the authorities. "You have effectively encircled them, Harry." "It is a siege," I said. "And they do not even know the walls are breached." I stood up. I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. It is a terrible thing to hunt your own family, but it is a necessary thing when they have turned into predators. "Thank you, Sterling," I said, extending my hand. He shook it firmly. "Good luck, Harry. I hope you find what you are looking for." I walked out of the bank and into the bright sunlight. I hailed a cab. I could not risk taking the bus today. I needed to get back to the house quickly. I needed to be in position. The cab ride was a blur. My mind was rehearsing the next 24 hours. I pictured the look on Brenda's face when the waiter at her favorite lunch spot came back with her card cut in half. I pictured Ryan trying to sign the sale papers, only to have the lawyers look at him with suspicion. I arrived at the estate. The gates opened automatically for the cab. I looked at the house as we approached. It looked majestic, standing tall against the blue sky. But I knew it was a house of cards, and I had just pulled the bottom card. I paid the driver with cash and walked to the front door. I let myself in. The house was buzzing with activity. There were suitcases in the hallway. Designer luggage stacked high. I walked into the living room. Brenda was there directing the maid on how to pack a box of crystal. Ryan was on the phone pacing back and forth, looking excited. "Dad," Ryan called out when he saw me. He actually smiled. A real smile. Or at least a very good fake one. "You are back early." "I just went for a walk," I lied, making my voice sound weak and raspy. "I sat in the park." "Well, good for you," Brenda said, not looking up from the crystal. "Stay out of the way, Harry. We are busy. We are going on a little trip." "A trip?" I asked, shuffling into the room and sitting on the edge of the sofa. "Yes," Ryan said, ending his call. "We are going to Italy for a few weeks. To celebrate. Closing a big deal." He winked at Brenda. She smirked. "That sounds expensive," I said, clutching my hands together to hide the fact that they were fists. "Do not worry about the cost," Dad, Ryan said, walking over and patting me on the shoulder. It was a patronizing pat like you would give a dog. "We have handled everything. The business is finally turning a corner. We are going to be very, very rich." I looked up at him. I looked into the eyes of my son. He was glowing with greed. He had no idea that in less than 24 hours he would be destitute. He had no idea that the credit card in his pocket was a ticking time bomb. "I am happy for you, Ryan," I said. "I really am. I was telling the truth. I was happy. I was happy that his true nature was so fully on display. It made what I was about to do so much easier." "Make sure you pack everything you need," I said softly. "You never know when you might be coming back." They ignored me. They went back to their packing, discussing first-class seats and five-star hotels. They were discussing how to spend the money they were stealing from me. I stood up and walked toward the stairs. "Where are you going?" Brenda asked. "To my room," I said. "I am tired. I think I will take a nap." "Go ahead," she said. "Just make sure you are up for dinner. We are ordering lobster. A final treat before we go." Lobster. Paid for with my money. I walked up the stairs. Each step felt heavy, but it was a good kind of heavy. It was the weight of the judge's gavel before the sentence is read. I went into my room and closed the door. I walked to the window and looked out at the grounds. 0 hour. Tomorrow at noon. I checked my watch. 18 hours to go. I would let them eat their lobster. I would let them drink my wine. I would let them sleep in my silk sheets one last time, because when they woke up tomorrow, the world would be a very different place. I sat down on the bed and pulled out the eviction notice from my inside pocket. I smoothed it out. Notice to vacate. I placed it on the nightstand, right next to the picture of our family taken 10 years ago. In the photo, we were all smiling. We looked happy. I turned the photo face down. That family was dead. The people downstairs were strangers, and tomorrow I was going to introduce them to the landlord. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of my secret office, casting long, sharp lines across the mahogany desk. I had not slept. I had spent the night staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence, waiting for the dawn that would bring the end of my family as I knew it. At 8 o'clock sharp, the heavy oak door opened, and Peterson walked in. He did not knock. He did not smile. He carried a thick black binder under his arm, holding it like a priest holds a Bible at a funeral. He placed the binder on the desk in front of me. The sound of it hitting the wood echoed in the large room. It was a heavy sound, the sound of judgment. "It is done," Peterson said, his voice devoid of emotion. "The forensic team worked through the night. We have everything." I looked at the black cover. I did not want to open it. As long as it was closed, there was still a tiny, foolish part of me that hoped it was all a mistake. That hoped my son was just incompetent, not a criminal. That hoped my wife was just spoiled, not a thief. But I knew better. I reached out and opened the cover. The first page was a summary. The numbers were printed in bold red ink. Total misappropriated funds, $4,200,000. I felt a physical blow to my chest. $4 million. In 6 months. I turned the page. There was a breakdown of the transactions. Ryan had been busy. He had set up a fake vendor called RC Logistics. Every week, Coleman Construction paid RC Logistics $50,000 for consulting fees. Consulting fees for a company that did not exist. He was not even trying to hide it, Peterson said, pointing to a line on the spreadsheet. He used his home address for the shell company. He thought you would never look. He thought he was smarter than the system. I traced the line with my finger. Ryan Coleman, my son. The boy who used to ask me for $5 to go to the movies was now stealing $50,000 a week from his own father. But it gets worse, Peterson said. Turn to Section 3. I flipped the pages. Section 3 was labeled Megan Coleman, my daughter-in-law. The woman who smiled at me at Thanksgiving and told me how much she admired my work ethic. The page was filled with credit card statements. Corporate Amex, Tiffany & Company $40,000, Cartier $65,000, Van Cleef & Arpels $120,000. She listed them as office supplies, Peterson said, his voice dripping with disgust. She bought a diamond necklace and marked it as printer toner in the ledger. She bought a Rolex and marked it as employee training. I felt a cold, hard rage settling in my stomach. It was not the money. I had plenty of money. It was the insult. They thought I was so stupid, so blind, that I would not know the difference between a diamond necklace and a box of toner. They were laughing at me with every swipe of the card. And here is the smoking gun, Peterson said, flipping to the back of the binder. It was a copy of a wire transfer request, dated for today. $12 million. This is the sale of the heavy equipment, Peterson explained. They are selling the cranes, the bulldozers, the excavators. They are stripping the company bare. The money is set to be wired to a bank in the Cayman Islands at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I looked at the time. It was 9 in the morning. They are cutting it close, I said. They are desperate, Peterson replied. They know the company is bleeding cash because of their theft. They need this sale to cover their tracks and fund their escape to Italy. If this wire goes through, the company is dead. 200 people lose their jobs. It will not go through, I said, closing the binder. No, Peterson said. It will not, because we are going to stop them. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a smaller folder. Inside were 3 arrest warrants. I had to call in a favor with the district attorney, Peterson said. Based on the evidence in this binder, he signed these an hour ago. Grand larceny, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit embezzlement. I looked at the names on the warrants. Ryan Coleman, Brenda Coleman, Megan Coleman, my family, my wife, my son, my daughter-in-law. I picked up the warrants. The paper felt light, but the weight of it was crushing. I was about to send my entire family to prison. I was about to become a man with no one. Are you sure about this? Harry Peterson asked softly. Once we execute these, there is no going back. You can stop it now. You can just fire them. You can just kick them out. You do not have to lock them up. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked down at the city one last time. I thought about the dinner table. I thought about Agnes calling me a freeloader. I thought about Brenda telling me to beg for breakfast money. I thought about the nursing home brochure in Ryan's trash can. They did not show me mercy. Peterson, I said, my voice hard as steel. They were going to lock me away. They were going to erase me. If I let them go, they will just find another victim. They will do this to someone else. Ryan will teach his children to do this. I turned back to face him. No. The cycle ends here. I walked back to the desk and picked up the black binder. I held it tight. This was my weapon. This was my shield. "What is the plan?" Peterson asked. I checked my watch. It is 9:30. They are at the house packing for Italy. They think they are flying out tonight. They think the money hits their account this afternoon. I put the warrants in my inside pocket. "I am going home," I said. "I am going to ask them for breakfast money one last time. I want to give them one final chance to show a shred of humanity, one final chance to confess." "And if they do not?" Peterson asked. "Then we execute the warrants," I said. "Have the police on standby. Tell them to wait down the street. When I give the signal, I want them to breach the front door." "And the signal?" Peterson asked. "I will text you," I said. One word. "Justice." Peterson nodded. He looked at me with a strange expression. Sadness, maybe, or respect. "You are a strong man, Harry," he said. "Stronger than I could ever be." "I am not strong, Peterson," I said, heading for the door. "I am just a builder. And when a building is rotten to the core, you do not paint over it. You tear it down." I walked out of the office. The binder was heavy under my arm. The ride down in the elevator felt like a descent into the underworld. I walked out onto the street and hailed a cab. "To the suburbs," I told the driver, "and do not spare the horses." As the city faded behind me, I opened the binder again. I looked at the picture of the diamond necklace Megan had bought. It was beautiful. It would look very nice in the evidence locker. I looked at the transfer for the $12 million. Freedom, Ryan had written on the brochure. He was right. He was buying freedom. But not for him. He was buying freedom for me. Freedom from his lies. Freedom from his greed. Freedom from the burden of trying to save a son who did not want to be saved. The cab pulled up to the estate gates. They were open. I could see a moving truck in the driveway. They were not just taking clothes. They were taking furniture. They were taking paintings. They were looting the palace before they burned it down. I paid the driver and stepped out. The sun was shining. Birds were singing. It was a beautiful day for a funeral. I walked up the driveway. My heart was a drum in my chest. Boom, boom, boom. I reached the front door. It was wide open. I could hear music playing inside. Happy, upbeat music. They were celebrating. I clutched the binder tighter. I stepped across the threshold. The lion was home, and the hunt was over. I walked into the living room, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the crisp smell of new leather luggage. The room looked like a departure lounge for the elite. Louis Vuitton suitcases were stacked by the door, ready for their first-class flight to Rome. My wife Brenda was holding a glass of champagne, her face flushed with the excitement of spending money she had not earned. Ryan was showing Megan pictures of the villa they had rented in Tuscany, a sprawling estate that cost more for a week than most honest men earned in a year. Agnes sat in my favorite armchair, looking like a queen on her throne, criticizing the maid for not packing her silk scarves properly. They were so happy. They were so confident. They looked at me as I entered, and their smiles did not fade, but they changed. They shifted from joy to mockery. I was the stain on their perfect picture. I was the old dog that needed to be put outside so the party could continue. I stopped in the middle of the room. I let my shoulders slump forward. I let my hands tremble slightly at my sides. I made my eyes look watery and confused. I had to sell this. I had to make them believe that I was completely broken. "Brenda," I said, my voice cracking just enough to sound pathetic. "I need to talk to you." Brenda sighed, rolling her eyes at Megan. She took a slow sip of her champagne before turning to me. "What is it now, Harry? Can you not see we are busy? The car will be here in an hour." "It is about breakfast," I said, looking down at my shoes. "I went to the store to get some eggs, but I think I lost the card. The one you gave me. I cannot find it anywhere. Ryan laughed. It was a sharp barking sound. You lost it. Dad. That was $500. Do you have any idea how irresponsible that is? I am sorry, I mumbled. I am hungry, Brenda. I have not eaten since yesterday. Could you just give me $20, just so I can go to the diner and get some pancakes? The room went silent. This was it. The moment of total submission. I was asking for $20 in a house worth millions. Brenda put her glass down. She walked over to me, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She stopped inches from my face. She smelled of vintage wine and arrogance. $20, she repeated softly. Yes, please, I said. Just 20. She smiled. It was a cruel, twisted smile. No. I looked up at her, feigning shock. No. Harry, I told you, she said, her voice raising so everyone could hear. I told you that you would have to learn. You think money grows on trees. You think you can just lose your allowance and come begging to me. Well, let this be a lesson. If you lost the card, you don't eat. Maybe hunger will help you remember where you put it. But Brenda, I pleaded, reaching out a shaking hand to touch her arm. She pulled away as if I were contagious. I am your husband. You are a burden, she spat. You are a child in an old man's body, and I am done taking care of you. Agnes chimed in from the armchair, her voice like grinding glass. That is right, Brenda. Stand your ground. If you give him money now, he will never learn. Without money, men are just noise. Keep him poor, and you keep him obedient. That is how you train a dog, and that is how you train a husband. Ryan walked over, shaking his head. Dad, honestly, this is embarrassing. You are embarrassing yourself. Just go to your room. We will leave some crackers out for you before we go to the airport. Crackers. I looked at them. Ryan, my son. Megan, who was currently wearing a diamond necklace she stole from my company. Brenda, the woman I had loved for 40 years. Agnes, the leech I had fed for decades. They were enjoying this. They were feeding on my humiliation. It made them feel powerful. It justified what they were doing. In their minds, I was weak, so I deserved to be crushed. I looked at the grandfather clock in the corner. Tick, tock. The big hand moved. It clicked into place at the top of the hour. 12 o'clock. 0 hour. I took a deep breath. I held it for a second, then released it. And then the sound of the future arrived. It started with Brenda's phone. A sharp, insistent ping. Then another. Then a rapid-fire series of vibrations on the table. Then Ryan's phone buzzed in his pocket. Then Megan's watch lit up. Brenda frowned, picking up her phone. Who is texting me this much? She muttered. She unlocked the screen. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. What is it? Ryan asked, pulling out his own phone. His face went pale. He looked at the screen, then he swiped, then he tapped furiously. My card, Ryan stammered. I just got an alert. My business card was declined for the villa deposit. They said the payment was reversed. That is impossible, Brenda snapped. I just checked the balance this morning. She tapped her screen again. It says, account frozen, she whispered. Suspected fraud. Contact issuer immediately. Megan shrieked. My cards too. I just tried to order the Uber Black, and it says payment method invalid. What is going on? Is the bank system down? Ryan looked up, panic starting to set in. It must be a glitch, a system-wide failure. I will call the bank. He dialed the number. He put it on speaker. The automated voice filled the room loud and cheerful. We are sorry, but the account ending in 4590 has been flagged for criminal activity and is currently under federal investigation. If you are the account holder, please remain on the line for law enforcement. Ryan dropped the phone. It hit the floor with a thud. Criminal activity, Agnes wheezed. What did you do, you idiot? You triggered an audit. I did not do anything, Ryan yelled. We were careful. I stood up. I did not stand up like the old man who wanted pancakes. I stood up like the man who built skyscrapers. I straightened my spine. The tremble in my hands vanished instantly. I buttoned my jacket with steady, precise movements. I looked at them and the mask fell away. My eyes were no longer watery. They were clear cold and hard as granite. It was not a glitch, Ryan, I said. My voice was deep and resonant, filling the room. They all turned to look at me. They looked confused, like they were seeing a stranger. Harry, Brenda said, her voice shaking. What are you talking about? I walked over to the table where the champagne was sitting. I picked up the bottle. I looked at the label. You told me I would have to beg for every penny, Brenda, I said calmly. You told me that without money I am just noise. I poured the expensive champagne onto the floor. It splashed onto the Persian rug, foaming and bubbling. Well, I have some bad news for you, I continued. You are the ones who are broke. Dad, Ryan stepped forward, trying to regain control. Dad, stop it. Did you call the bank? Did you mess with the accounts? You do not know what you are doing. You are going to ruin the trip. I turned on him. The intensity of my gaze stopped him in his tracks. I know exactly what I am doing, I said. I am the primary account holder. I am the chairman of the board. And I am the man who just cut you off. What do you mean? Brenda whispered. I mean that the cards you are holding are plastic trash, I said. I mean that the villa in Italy is gone. I mean that the first-class tickets are cancelled. You cannot do that, Megan screamed. We are authorized users. You were authorized users on the accounts of HC Holdings, I roared. My company, my money. And as of 12 o'clock today, HC Holdings has terminated all subsidiary privileges due to gross misconduct and theft. Theft, Agnes gasped. How dare you? I reached into my jacket pocket. I did not pull out a handkerchief. I pulled out the black binder that Peterson had given me. It was heavy. I threw it. I did not hand it to them. I threw it across the room. It spun through the air and crashed into Ryan's chest. He stumbled back, clutching it. Open it, I commanded. Ryan's hands were shaking now. Real shaking, not the fake kind I had used earlier. He opened the binder. He saw the red numbers. He saw the list of shell companies. He saw the emails he thought were deleted. How? He whispered. How did you get this? You thought I was senile, I said, stepping closer to him. You thought I was a helpless old man who cared about gardening and naps. You forgot who I am, son. I am the one who taught you how to read. And I am the one who just read your diary. I looked at Brenda. She was pale as a sheet, clutching the sofa for support. You wanted to put me in a home, Brenda, I said softly. A state-funded facility. You wanted to drug me and forget me while you spent my life's work. Harry. No, that was just a contingency, she stammered. Liar, I shouted. The sound echoed off the walls, and then another sound joined it. The sound of sirens, heavy wailing sirens coming up the driveway. Not one car, 3 cars. They froze. The color drained from their faces completely. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. Peterson was standing there. Behind him were 4 police officers and 2 men in dark suits with FBI badges. Peterson walked in. He looked at the luggage. He looked at the champagne on the floor. He looked at my family huddled together like frightened sheep. Mr. Coleman, Peterson said, Is everyone present? Yes, Peterson, I said. The whole gang is here. One of the FBI agents stepped forward. Ryan Coleman, Brenda Coleman, Megan Coleman. I have warrants for your arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit embezzlement." Agnes let out a scream. Not a scream of fear, but a scream of fury. "You cannot do this. We are the Colemans." "Not anymore," I said. The officers moved in. It was chaos. Handcuffs clicked. Megan started crying, loud, ugly sobs, begging me to tell them it was a mistake. Brenda tried to pull away, screaming that she was my wife. Harry, tell them we were just managing the money. Tell them I watched them. I watched the police pat them down. I watched them dragging my son, who was crying like the child he still was. I walked over to Ryan. The officer held him back. Ryan looked at me, tears streaming down his face. "Dad, please," he sobbed. "Please don't do this. I am your son." I looked him in the eye. "My son would never have tried to sell my company behind my back," I said. "My son would never have called me a freeloader. You are not my son. You are just a thief who shares my last name." I turned to the officer. "Take them away." They dragged them out the door. The wailing faded as they were shoved into the back of the squad cars. Agnes was left sitting in the armchair, alone, untouched, but destroyed. She looked small. She looked old. I looked at her. "You said that without money men are just noise, Agnes," I said. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Well," I said, buttoning my coat, "I have all the money, and you are the one who is going to be very, very quiet." I turned to Peterson. "Issue the eviction notice," I said. "She has 60 minutes to pack. If she is not out by 1 o'clock, call the sheriff." I walked out onto the porch. The police cars were driving away, carrying the people who had tried to destroy me. I watched them go. I took a deep breath of the fresh air. I reached into my pocket and felt for the debit card with the $500. I still had it. I turned to Peterson. "Peterson," I said. "Yes, Harry. I am starving. Let's go get some pancakes. My treat." Peterson smiled. "It would be my honor, Harry." We walked down the steps, leaving the empty house behind. The war was over, and for the first time in a long time the Lion was full. The metallic click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound I had ever heard in that house. It cut through the sobbing and the screaming like a knife. I watched as the officer pulled Ryan's arms behind his back. My son, who had spent his life in soft suits and comfortable chairs, flinched at the cold touch of the steel. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a terror I had never seen in him before. It was the terror of a man who realizes that the safety net he has jumped into his entire life is no longer there. "Dad, please." Ryan stammered, his face pressed against the Persian rug where I had poured the champagne. "You have to stop this. This is a mistake. I can fix it. I can put the money back. We can work this out." I looked down at him. There was no anger left in me, only a deep, hollow fatigue. "You cannot put the money back, Ryan," I said quietly. "You cannot put trust back once you have shredded it. You cannot put a father's love back once you have sold it for a villa in Tuscany." The officer pulled him up. Ryan stumbled, his expensive Italian loafers sliding on the wet floor. He looked small. He looked like a stranger. "You have the right to remain silent." The officer recited, his voice bored and professional. "I suggest you use that right, Ryan," I said. "You have said enough." Across the room, Megan was hysterical. She was trying to pull her wrist away from a female officer. She was screaming about her rights, about how this was harassment. The officer was not impressed. She spun Megan around and pinned her against the wall. "Ma'am, stop resisting," the officer warned. "Wait," I said, stepping forward. The room went quiet. Megan looked at me, hope flickering in her eyes. She thought I was going to save her. She thought the old soft Harry was back. I walked up to her. I pointed a finger at her neck. "That necklace," I said. "The diamond pendant. It was purchased with company funds on March 12th. It is evidenced, The officer nodded. She reached up and unclasped the necklace. Megan gasped as the cold air hit her skin. The officer dropped the jewelry into a plastic evidence bag. It landed with a dull thud. And the watch, I added. The Rolex, company property. Megan began to sob uncontrollably as they stripped her of the symbols of her theft. She looked naked without them. She was just a greedy girl who had reached into the wrong pocket. Then there was Brenda. My wife was not screaming. She was not fighting. She was standing in the middle of the room, her hands covering her mouth, staring at me. When the FBI agent approached her, she flinched, but she did not run. She just looked at me. "Harry," she whispered. Her voice was trembling. "Harry, 40 years. We have been married for 40 years. You cannot send me to prison. I am your wife." I looked at her. I saw the woman I had built this life for. I saw the woman I had trusted with my secrets, my fears, and my dreams. And I saw the woman who had sat in this very room yesterday and told me to beg her for $20. "You were my wife, Brenda," I said, my voice steady. "But a wife does not plan to lock her husband in a state asylum. A wife does not conspire to declare him incompetent so she can steal his life's work. You ceased to be my wife the moment you signed those papers. Now you are just a co-conspirator." "Please," she begged, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. I was scared. I was worried about the future. "No," I said. "You were greedy. You wanted the lifestyle without the man. Well, now you have neither." The agent took her arm. She let out a low wail, a sound of pure despair. They led her past me. She reached out a hand trying to grab my sleeve, but I stepped back. I let her pass. I watched them walk out the front door, the red and blue lights of the police cruisers flashing against the walls of the hallway. The house fell silent except for the heavy breathing of one person, Agnes. My mother-in-law was still sitting in the armchair. She had not moved. She looked like a melted wax statue. Her face was pale, her eyes staring blankly at the open door where her daughter and grandson had just been taken away. She was gripping the armrests so tightly, her knuckles were yellow. She was not in handcuffs. She had been careful. She had never signed the checks. She had never sent the emails. She was the poison whisperer, the one who encouraged the crime, but never touched the weapon. I walked over to her. Peterson followed me, pulling a single sheet of paper from his briefcase. Agnes looked up at me. Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Then she found her voice. It was weak, scratching like dry leaves. "You monster," she hissed. "You destroyed this family." I laughed. It was a short, dry laugh. "I did not destroy anything, Agnes. I just took out the trash." Peterson stepped forward. He held out the paper. Agnes refused to take it, so he placed it gently on her lap. "Ms. Miller," Peterson said, his voice professional and cold. "This is a formal notice to vacate. As the legal representative of HC Holdings, the owner of this property, I am informing you that your tenancy is terminated effective immediately." Agnes looked at the paper, then at me. "You are kicking me out?" she asked, her voice rising in disbelief. "I am an 80-year-old woman. Where am I supposed to go?" "I do not know, Agnes," I said. "And frankly, I do not care. Maybe you can go to that budget-friendly facility Brenda found for me. I hear they have vacancies." Her jaw dropped. "You have 60 minutes, Peterson said, checking his watch. "You may take your personal clothing and toiletries. Anything purchased with funds from the Coleman construction accounts stays here. If you are not off the premises by 1 o'clock, the sheriff deputies waiting outside will remove you for trespassing." 60 minutes, she shrieked. "That is impossible." "You better start packing," I said. I turned my back on her. I walked to the window and watched the scene outside. The neighbors had come out of their houses. They were standing on their lawns watching as Ryan and Brenda were placed into the back of the police cars. The shame was public. The humiliation was absolute. I heard Agnes scrambling out of the chair behind me. I heard her cursing, muttering vile things about me as she dragged her suitcase toward the stairs. She was moving faster than I had ever seen her move. Fear is a powerful motivator. I stood there for the full hour. I listened to the sounds of my house being purged. I heard the frantic zipping of zippers. I heard the thud of suitcases being dragged down the stairs. At 12:55, Agnes appeared in the hallway. She was dragging 2 large bags. She was sweating. Her hair was a mess. She looked at me one last time. There was hate in her eyes, pure and undiluted. "I hope you rot in this big empty house," she spat. "You will die alone." I looked at her. I felt a strange sense of peace. "I would rather die alone than live with snakes," I said. She huffed and dragged her bags out the door. Peterson followed her to ensure she left the property. I watched her struggle down the driveway, a bitter old woman who had gambled everything on her daughter's greed and lost. When she reached the gate, Peterson closed it behind her. The automatic lock clicked shut. It was over. The police cars were gone. The neighbors had gone back inside, their curiosity satisfied. The driveway was empty. I turned back to the room. It was messy. The champagne was drying on the rug. The furniture was askew, but the air felt lighter. The heaviness that had pressed down on my chest for months was gone. Peterson walked back into the house. He looked at me and nodded. "They are gone, Harry. The house is yours." I looked around. It was a big house, too big for one man. But for the first time in years, it felt like mine. It did not feel like a fortress of expectations. It felt like a blank canvas. "Thank you, Peterson," I said. "What do you want to do now?" he asked. I walked to the table and picked up the phone Brenda had dropped. I placed it on the side table. "I want to sit down," I said. "I want to sit in my chair, the one at the head of the table. And I want to drink a cup of coffee that I paid for." Peterson smiled. "I think there is some in the kitchen." I walked into the dining room. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table, the one they had moved. I dragged it back to its rightful place. I sat down. The wood felt solid beneath me. I was alone. My family was in jail. My marriage was over. By all accounts, I should have been devastated. But as I sat there listening to the silence, I realized something. I had not lost a family. I had survived a disease. I had cut out the infection before it killed me. I reached into my pocket and touched the $500 debit card. They had told me I was worth nothing without them. They were wrong. I was worth everything. And now I had the rest of my life to prove it. I closed my eyes and let out a long breath. Checkmate. 3 months have passed since the day the police cars rolled down my driveway with lights flashing. 3 months since the silence of the empty house deafened me only to be replaced by the sweet symphony of order and peace. I sat in my office at HC Holdings, the real office, the one that sits high above the city like a fortress of solitude. The view was spectacular today. The autumn leaves were turning gold and red in the park, below a reminder that change, even when it involves falling apart, can be beautiful. The door opened and Frank walked in. He did not knock timidly like the terrified employees Ryan had hired. He knocked with the confidence of a man who knows he belongs. Frank looked 10 years younger. The dark circles under his eyes were gone, replaced by the spark of a man doing what he loves. He was back as the CEO of Coleman Construction, and in just 90 days, he had undone almost all the damage. "Harry," he said, placing a report on my desk, "you are going to like this. We just secured the contract for the new hospital wing, and the bank has fully restored our credit rating. The bleeding has stopped." I smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached my eyes. "Thank you, Frank. I knew you could do it. I never should have let you go." I did not go far, Harry. He chuckled. Just far enough to appreciate coming back. He pointed to the mug in my hand. Is that from the fancy machine? No, I said, lifting the cup. I went down to the street. I bought it from the cart on the corner. $2. Cash. Frank nodded, understanding the symbolism. It is the best cup of coffee in the world, isn't it? It tastes like freedom, Frank, I said. It tastes like absolute control. Frank left to get back to work, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I swiveled my chair to look out the window. I thought about where my family was right now. Ryan and Megan were awaiting trial. Their lawyers were trying to cut a plea deal, but the evidence Peterson had gathered was ironclad. They were looking at 5 to 10 years. The villa in Tuscany would have to wait. The only Italian they would be learning was the brand of spaghetti served in the prison cafeteria. And then there was Brenda, my wife, my ex-wife as of the papers signed last week. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a manila envelope. It was a report from the private investigator I had kept on retainer. I wanted to make sure she wasn't plotting anything. I wanted to make sure she understood that the well had truly run dry. I opened the folder. There was a photo attached to the top report. It showed a woman in a pale blue uniform wearing an apron wiping down a table at a diner on the outskirts of the city. She looked tired. Her hair, once dyed and styled every week, was pulled back in a messy bun. Her nails, which used to be long and manicured, were short and unpolished. Brenda was working as a waitress. I read the report. She was living in a small studio apartment above a garage. She took the bus to work. She spent her days serving eggs and coffee to truck drivers and shift workers. I stared at the photo. I felt a strange emotion. It wasn't pity. Pity implies that the person is a victim of circumstance. Brenda was a victim of her own arrogance. She had everything. She had a husband who loved her. She had a home. She had security. And she threw it all away because she wanted to make me beg. She told me I would have to ask her for money to buy breakfast. She told me that without money, a man is just noise. I reached for my checkbook. Not the company checkbook. My personal one. The one linked to the account that only I could access. I pulled out my fountain pen. The same pen I had used to sign the eviction notice. I uncapped it and smoothed out the check. Pay to the order of Brenda Coleman. I wrote the date. And then in the box for the amount I wrote the number carefully. $500. I wrote it out in words on the line below. $500. It was the exact amount she had put on that prepaid debit card. The exact amount she said was enough for me to survive on for a week. I tore the check out of the book. It made a crisp, ripping sound. I took a piece of stationery, my personal letterhead, and I wrote a short note. I did not write a letter. I did not ask how she was. I did not tell her I missed her. I wrote, "Here is your allowance. Breakfast is on me. Do not spend it all on wine." I folded the check inside the note and placed it in an envelope. I sealed it. I pressed my thumb against the seal, feeling the finality of it. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. "Susan, can you come in here, please?" My new assistant, a bright young woman who was paying her way through law school, walked in. "Yes, Mr. Coleman." "Please have this mailed," I said, handing her the envelope. "Certified mail. I want to make sure she receives it personally." "Consider it done," she said, taking the envelope. "Is there anything else?" "No, Susan," I said. "That is all." She left the room. I sat back in my chair. I imagined Brenda receiving the envelope. I imagined her seeing the return address. I imagined her opening it, her hands trembling, hoping for a reconciliation, hoping for a way back in. And then I imagined her seeing the check. $500. And the note. It was petty, I knew it was petty. But it was also necessary. It was the final period at the end of a long, painful sentence. It was my way of telling her that the dynamic had permanently shifted. I was no longer the beggar. I was the benefactor. And she was finally learning the value of $1. I took another sip of my coffee. It was cold now, but it didn't matter. I felt warm inside. I looked around my office. It was quiet. For a long time, I was afraid of this silence. I thought silence meant loneliness. I thought that a full house, even a house full of vipers, was better than an empty one. I was wrong. Silence is not empty. It is full of answers. It is full of peace. I picked up the phone and called Frank. "Frank," I said. "Yes, Harry." "About that hospital wing project," I said. "Let's double the donation to the pediatric center." "Double it?" Frank asked. "That is a lot of money, Harry." "I know," I said, looking at the empty spot on my desk where the picture of my family used to be. "But I have realized something, Frank. Money is like water. If you hoard it, it stagnates and rots. If you let it flow, it brings life. I want my money to build things, not to destroy people." "I understand," Harry, Frank said softly. "I will draw up the paperwork." I hung up the phone. I stood up and walked to the window one last time. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the city of Chicago. I was 72 years old. I was single. My son was in jail. My ex-wife was a waitress. By society's standards, my personal life was a disaster. But as I watched the lights of the city flicker on one by one, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. I had my dignity. I had my sanity. I had my company. And most importantly, I had the truth. I wasn't a freeloader. I wasn't a senile old man. I was Harry Coleman. I was a builder. And I was just getting started on my greatest project yet. A life lived on my own terms. The lion was not sleeping. The lion was awake. And for the first time in years, the jungle was quiet. From this story, we learn a harsh but necessary truth about the nature of relationships and resources. Blood may connect us biologically, but it does not guarantee loyalty, respect, or love. True family is defined by how they treat you when you are vulnerable, not by how much they can extract from you when you are strong. Harry's journey teaches us that financial independence is the ultimate form of self-defense. We must never hand over the keys to our life, our dignity, or our hard-earned success to anyone, even our children, without verifying their character first. Generosity without boundaries is not love. It is just fuel for entitlement. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is cut the cord and let people face the consequences of their own actions. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit the like button. Right now, it helps the channel grow. Make sure you are subscribed so you never miss a new story. And I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member to save yourself? Tell me your story in the comments below, and don't forget to include which city and time you are watching from. See you in the next video.